The sledgehammer struck concrete with the fury of 50 years of suppressed rage, sending chunks of foundation flying across the abandoned construction site like shrapnel from an explosion that had been building since 1973. Earl Mackenzie's 71-year-old shoulders screamed in protest, but he swung again and again, the impact reverberating through his arthritic hands and up his spine. Each blow was aimed at more than just concrete. It was meant for the smirking faces of the 20-something cashiers who'd filmed him sleeping at his security post, for the store manager who'd fired him with corporate politeness and barely concealed disgust for every person who'd looked at him in the past decade like he was already dead. "Fucking dinosaur," he muttered through gritted teeth, the words echoing off the skeletal remains of what was supposed to have been Riverside Shopping Complex. The same words Jaden, the kid with the lip ring and attitude, had whispered just loud enough for the security cameras to pick up. The same words that had been the caption on the TikTok video that got Earl terminated after 6 months of barely making rent. The concrete cracked deeper with each strike, revealing the dark space beneath that had haunted Earl's nightmares for half a century. This was where it had happened. This was where Tommy Kowalski had fallen through the improperly reinforced floor into the foundation pit, breaking his neck on the rebar 20 feet below, while Earl watched, helpless, from the scaffolding above. The construction company had covered it up fast, too fast. New concrete poured within hours, work resuming the next day as if Tommy had never existed. Earl had tried to report it, tried to get someone to listen, but 1973 was a different time. Workers died on job sites, shit happened, and asking too many questions was a good way to end up blacklisted from every construction crew in the state. So Earl had kept his mouth shut, taken his paycheck, and spent the next 50 years wondering what else they'd buried beneath that smooth gray surface. Now the complex sat half-finished and abandoned, a victim of the 2008 financial crisis and a dozen lawsuits over structural defects. The city had condemned it but lacked the funds for demolition, leaving it as a monument to corporate incompetence and municipal neglect. Earl had driven past it countless times over the years, always slowing down, always remembering Tommy's surprised expression in the split second before gravity claimed him. The sledgehammer struck again, and this time the concrete gave way completely. A section roughly 3 feet square caved in, revealing a dark cavity that exhaled the smell of decades-old decay and something else, something metallic and wrong. Earl set down the hammer and pulled out his phone's flashlight, the same phone that had buzzed constantly for 3 days after the security guard video went viral. Notifications from social media platforms he'd never heard of, friend requests from strangers who wanted to mock him, job opportunities from pyramid schemes and payday loan companies who'd somehow gotten his number. The light revealed a space, larger than he'd expected, maybe 8 feet deep and 12 wide. The walls were rough concrete, clearly poured in a hurry, and the floor was littered with construction debris from 1973, pieces of rebar, chunks of old concrete, scraps of wood that had somehow avoided decay in the sealed environment, and bones. Human bones, yellowed with age but unmistakably recognizable. A skull grinned up at him from the far corner, jaw slightly open as if frozen in the middle of screaming. Earl's breath caught in his throat. Tommy's remains, finally exposed after 50 years of concrete purgatory. But as he moved the light around the cavity, he realized there were more bones than one body should have. Many more. 3 skulls, maybe 4. Rib cages scattered like broken umbrellas. Femurs arranged in neat piles as if someone had been organizing them. And beneath it all, partially buried in the dirt floor of the cavity, the corner of what looked like a metal filing cabinet. Earl lowered himself into the hole, his knees protesting but holding his weight. The filing cabinet was locked, but the metal had corroded enough that a few kicks broke the mechanism. Inside, water-stained manila folders held documents that made his blood run cold. Invoices for concrete delivery, dated 3 days after Tommy's death. Purchase orders for quicklime and industrial bleach, and photographs, Polaroids that someone had taken as documentation or insurance, showing bodies being positioned in the cavity before the concrete was poured. Tommy was there, but so were others. A woman in a waitress uniform, her name tag still visible. "Hi, I'm Carol." A man in a suit, his briefcase still clutched in skeletal fingers. Two teenagers who looked like they'd been dressed for a night out in 1973, their bell-bottom jeans and platform shoes preserved by the sealed environment. At the bottom of the file, Earl found what he was looking for, a handwritten list on construction company letterhead. Names, dates, and amounts of money. The heading read Final Solutions Contract Completions. Carol Hutchins, June 15, 1973, $15,000. Robert Daniels, July 2, 1973, $12,000. Thomas Kowalski, July 18, 1973, $8,000. Jennifer Martinez, July 18, 1973, $8,000. David Martinez, July 18, 1973, $8,000. Tommy hadn't fallen through weak flooring. He'd been murdered, along with at least 4 others, by a construction company that was apparently running a side business in making people disappear. The teenagers, the Martinez kids, had been killed the same day as Tommy, probably witnesses to whatever had gotten Carol and Robert killed. Earl's hands shook as he photographed every document, every bone, every piece of evidence. This wasn't just about Tommy anymore. This was about a systematic operation that had used the construction site as a body dump, hiding murders behind the facade of industrial accidents. His phone buzzed with a notification. Another comment on the security guard video, probably another kid calling him a boomer or questioning why anyone his age was still working. But when he looked at the screen, he saw something different, a message from someone named Chris Kowalski. "Hey, I saw your video. I know this is weird, but you look exactly like someone in an old photo my grandfather had. Your last name wouldn't happen to be Mackenzie, would it? My grandfather used to work construction and he always said his friend Earl Mackenzie was the only one who tried to help when my dad died on a job site in 1973. Earl stared at the message, his heart pounding. Tommy's son, the baby who'd been born 3 months after his father's death. The child Earl had wondered about for 50 years. The kid was a grown man now, probably in his 40s, and he was reaching out because a viral video of Earl's humiliation had somehow found its way to him. More messages appeared as Earl scrolled through his phone. Linda Hutchins Walsh. Are you the Earl Mackenzie who worked construction in the 70s? My mother, Carol, disappeared in 1973. She was a waitress, and she knew some construction workers. I've been looking for answers my whole life. Rebecca Daniels Thompson. My father, Robert Daniels, went missing in July 1973. He was supposed to meet someone about a construction contract. Please tell me you remember something. Maria Santos, formerly Martinez. My siblings, Jennifer and David, were murdered in 1973. The police said they were runaways, but I knew better. They were good kids. Someone killed them and covered it up. If you know anything, please help me. The families had been searching for answers for decades, and somehow, Earl's viral humiliation had connected him to all of them. The internet that had mocked him was now serving as an unintended investigative tool, linking him to people who shared his need for truth. Earl climbed out of the cavity and called 911, explaining to a skeptical dispatcher that he'd found human remains at an abandoned construction site. While he waited for police to arrive, he sent messages to each of the family members, attaching photos of the documents he'd found. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Phone calls, text messages, video calls with people he'd never met but who felt like family. Tommy's son Chris looked exactly like his father, with the same crooked smile and stubborn jawline. Carol's daughter Linda had her mother's eyes and her mother's determination to find the truth. The Martinez family had been carrying the weight of their siblings' disappearance for 50 years, told by police that Jennifer and David had probably run away to California like so many other kids in the 70s. By the time the police arrived, Earl had connected with 7 family members of the 5 victims, people who'd spent decades wondering what had happened to their loved ones. The viral video that was supposed to humiliate him had instead solved a 50-year-old multiple murder case. Detective Sarah Morgan, a woman in her 40s who looked like she'd seen everything, examined the cavity and the documents with professional interest. This is going to be a major case, she told Earl. Multiple homicides covered up by what looks like a construction company hit operation. You realize you've just blown open one of the biggest cold cases in state history? Earl nodded, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. I just wanted to find my friend Tommy. I didn't know about the others. The construction company, Riverside Development, they built half the commercial district in the 70s and 80s. Detective Morgan continued. If they were using construction sites to dispose of bodies, there could be dozens more victims. Over the next 6 months, the investigation expanded to include 12 construction sites built by Riverside Development between 1972 and 1979. Ground penetrating, radar revealed anomalies at 7 locations. Excavation uncovered the remains of 23 people, along with documentation of a murder-for-hire operation that had used construction projects as cover for body disposal. The story made national news, but not in the way Earl had expected. Instead of being portrayed as a pathetic old man who'd been caught sleeping on the job, he was hailed as the amateur detective who'd solved a decades-old serial killing case. The same TikTok video that had gotten him fired was now being shared as an example of how social media could reconnect families and solve cold cases. Chris Kowalski started a podcast about the investigation, interviewing family members and exploring how the murders had been covered up for so long. Linda Hutchins Walsh wrote a book about her mother's life and death, dedicating it to Earl Mackenzie, who never forgot. The Martinez family established a scholarship fund for criminal justice, students naming Earl as their first board member. But the strangest twist came 6 months after the discovery, when Earl received a call from Jaden, the cashier who'd filmed him sleeping and posted the video that started everything. "Look, Mr. Mackenzie," the kid said, his voice lacking the smirking confidence Earl remembered. "I know I was a dick to you. We all were. But I've been following this story and, shit, man, if I hadn't posted that video, those families never would have found you. Those people never would have gotten answers about what happened to their family members." Earl found himself smiling for the first time in months. "So you're saying being an asshole accidentally made you a hero?" "Something like that. Look, I quit that job anyway. The whole thing made me think about, I don't know, how we treat people. My grandfather was a Vietnam vet and people treated him like shit too. I never understood why he was always angry until I started reading about your friend Tommy and the other people who died." The conversation lasted an hour, with Jaden asking questions about the investigation and Earl finding himself telling stories about Tommy that he'd never shared with anyone. By the end, they'd arranged to meet for coffee. 2 generations separated by 50 years but connected by a shared understanding of how the past could reach into the present and demand justice. The Riverside shopping complex was finally demolished, a year later, but not before every square foot had been excavated and examined. The final count was 31 victims, killed between 1972 and 1979 by a network that included construction workers, city officials, and organized crime figures who had all died or disappeared decades earlier. Earl spoke at the memorial service for the victims, standing before an audience that included family members, law enforcement officials, and reporters from around the country. He looked older than his 72 years, but his voice was strong as he talked about Tommy Kowalski and the importance of never forgetting the people who disappear. "Tommy fell into that hole 50 years ago," he said, "but he never really left. None of them did. They were waiting for someone to remember, someone to care enough to dig deeper. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you, getting humiliated, getting fired, feeling like the world has forgotten you, sometimes that's exactly what needs to happen for the truth to come out." After the service, Earl drove to the empty lot where the shopping complex used to stand. The ground had been leveled and seeded with grass, and there was talk of turning it into a memorial park. But for now, it was just an empty space where secrets had been buried and finally unearthed. He sat in his car looking at the TikTok notification on his phone. The original video of him sleeping on the security guard job now had 47 million views and had spawned a documentary series, 3 true crime podcasts, and a Netflix deal that would ensure he never had to work retail security again. The comment section had evolved too. Instead of mocking an old man who'd fallen asleep at work, people were sharing their own stories about forgotten victims, unsolved disappearances, and the importance of treating elderly workers with dignity. Several other cold cases had been solved after family members connected through social media posts inspired by Earl's story. Earl's phone rang. It was Chris Kowalski, calling with an update about the ongoing investigation into other Riverside development sites. "We found something," Chris said, his voice tight with excitement. "Another cavity, bigger than the others. The FBI thinks there might be evidence linking this to similar operations in other states. You might have uncovered a national network, Earl." Earl smiled, thinking about Tommy and the way he'd always insisted on doing the right thing, even when it was dangerous. "Tommy would have loved this," he said. "He always said the truth has a way of working itself out given enough time." As he drove home that evening, Earl realized that getting fired from the security guard job had been the best thing that ever happened to him. Not because of the money or the fame or the recognition, but because it had finally given him the push he needed to dig into the ground where his friend had died. Sometimes humiliation was just the first step toward redemption. Sometimes viral mockery was exactly what the world needed to pay attention to the stories that mattered. And sometimes an old man with a sledgehammer and 50 years of guilt was exactly what it took to bring the dead back to life long enough to tell their stories. The sinkhole Earl had created in the concrete had become a window into the past, revealing not just bones and documents, but the truth that institutions had spent decades trying to hide. In the end, that truth had proven more powerful than any amount of corporate cover-up or social media ridicule. Tommy Kowalski and the 30 other victims finally had their justice, and Earl Mackenzie finally had his peace.